Welcome to this edition of Clinical Clips, an accredited continuing education activity. This brief 5-minute expert video will spotlight the daily hot topics from the conference.
Hi, I'm Doug Dietrich from Mount Sinai, coming to you from Vienna, the 50th Easl. There was a lot of data presented today on hepatitis C. There was a very large number of abstracts presented on both compensated and decompensated cirrhotics and the treatment pre and post-transplant. The results are extremely good with the direct-acting antivirals treating both pre and post-transplant child's A, B, and C decompensated patients. C salvage is looking at failures of telaprevir, boceprevir, and cimipravir, so protease inhibitor failures, with their two drugs, grazoprevir and elbasvir, along with ribavirin, for 12 weeks. And up to 40% of the patients in the study could have been cirrhotic, so there was a significant number of sick patients in this study. The total SVR was 96%, which is pretty astounding, frankly, in this failure group and considering the fact that elbasvir is a protease as well. So it's able to overcome protease resistance without interferon with ribavirin, very high numbers, 96%, C salvage. Another study about actually from the VA, presented by a health economist, was complicated. They showed us a few numbers. Overall, 5.4% of our veterans are infected with hepatitis C. But I think what's really important is one of the things that came out in the JAMA article in February was that anybody who even was ever treated and got their hepatitis C undetectable had a significantly decreased risk of death by about 45%. And when you added it all up in terms of treatment, was that the number of people needed to treat to prevent one death went from 180 to 360 if you waited for patients to get sicker. That is, if you waited to have them be stage 3 or stage 4. So I think in the brave new world of managed care, arguing that to wait actually really reduces your chances of success and increases the number of patients needed to prevent one death. A very important message for the managed care folks. Finally, the last two things we wanted to discuss. C-SWIFT, which was presented by Fred Pordad. It's 3 drugs, protease, NS5A, and nuke together, genotype 1 or 3. SVR rates, actually in proof of principle here, for 4 weeks it was not very good, 33%. 6 weeks, 87. So it shows some promise. In cirrhotics, it was 80 and 94 for 8 weeks. So it looks like 8 weeks is the number. And then for genotype 3, which has always been, the last few years has been the worst to treat, it was for 8 weeks it was 93, 12 weeks 100%, and even in 12 weeks for cirrhotics it was 91%. So overall, very, very impressive numbers in this combination of 3 drugs, 3 different classes. So I think this portends great things to come for a combination of 3 classes of drugs. One of the 2 studies that addressed previous failures to respond was presented by Eric Lawitz. And he looked at patients that were gathered together from 4 or 5 different studies of sofosbuvir ledipasvir, and they retreated them with 24 weeks of sofosbuvir ledipasvir, but without ribavirin. There were 46% cirrhotics in these patients, and actually this is sort of a new idea that we have to start thinking about, is that pre-existing resistance mutations do seem to make a difference when you're retreating these patients. So the patients, for instance, who were treated with only 8 weeks in the past, only 63% of them had resistance mutations. The ones who were treated for 12 weeks, 100% of those had resistance mutations. And not surprisingly, the ones who were treated for 8 weeks did much better. Overall, they did quite well. Without any NS5A mutations, it was 100% in terms of cirrhosis, 68%. And then 8 versus 12 is where the surprise is. Those who were treated for 8 weeks before was 80%, and those who were treated for 12 weeks, who got 24 weeks of sofosbuvir without ribavirin, had only a 46% SVR rate, and that was somewhat disappointing. Clearly that's related to the presence of the RABs or the resistance mutations to the NS5A. Thank you. That's all we have for today from Vienna. We'll be back tomorrow with more highlights of the 50th Easl meeting from Vienna.
We hope you found this activity useful and educational. To receive continuing education credit and to download your printable certificate, please return to the activity webpage and click on the Claim Credit button associated with today's clinical clip.